Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're the place you come to when you want to get right into the thick of the ideas that, well, really shape how we understand everything.
And today, we're tackling a big one, a real foundational debate in philosophy, focusing on two absolute giants of the 18th century, David Hume and Immanuel Kant.
Yeah, this is about causality, cause and effect. Seems simple, maybe, but their clash over whether that necessary link between a cause and its effect is real out there in the world or just something our minds cook up, well, it changes everything.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to really unpack this. We need to start with Hume, with his pretty radical skepticism. He basically said, look, you never see the necessary connection, the force.
Right. You see one thing happen, then another thing happen.
Exactly. And that skepticism really pushed Kant, didn't it? It sort of forced him to rethink the whole basis of objective knowledge to save science, in a way.
So the tension is this. That feeling of the cue ball hits the eight ball must move. Is that must part of the physics, part of the world?
Or is it just in our heads, a psychological thing?
Hume's challenge was stark. If you can't point to the sensory experience, the observation of that necessary link, you can't claim to know it. It's just imagination.
And Kant's comeback, decades later, was, look, if we didn't already have that necessary connection as part of how our minds work, we couldn't even have the kind of objective experience that science relies on. It's fundamental.
Okay, let's dig into Hume first. We need to really get why his argument was so powerful, so unsettling.
Definitely. To see why Kant's response was so revolutionary, you have to feel the force of Hume's doubt. It all comes down to his empiricism. For Hume, all knowledge, every idea we have, has to ultimately come from sensory impressions.
Stuff you see, hear, touch, taste, smell, the raw data.
The raw data. So take your example. Light a candle, the wax melts. You have an impression of the flame. You have an impression of the melting wax.
Okay, two distinct things I perceive.
Right, but Hume asks, where's the impression of the causal necessity? Where do you sense the power, the force, making the flame melt the wax?
Nowhere? I see the flame, then I see the melting. I see they're close together.
Exactly. You sense contiguity, they're near each other. You sense temporal priority, flame first, then melting. But the actual oomph, the necessary connection, never sensed.
So if you can't sense it,
then the idea of it can't come from experience. And if it doesn't come from experience, Hume argues, it can't be rationally justified a priori either. It must be something we invent, something the mind adds.
Wow. Okay, that's big. It means the idea that A causes B isn't a fact about the universe we discover.
It's not a logical necessity we can deduce. For Hume, it becomes a principle of the imagination. He puts it alongside things like resemblance and contiguity. These are just ways our imagination naturally associates ideas that come in through the senses. Causality is just one of those mental habits.
But that sounds, how does science even work then? If it's just one event after another, disconnectedly, how can we predict anything?
That's the core of the problem he leaves us with. And that's why his idea of constant conjunction is so important. He's not denying we think there's causality. He's explaining where that thought comes from.
Okay, so constant conjunction means we just see it happen over and over.
Yes, it rises purely a posteriori, from experience. We see things of type A striking a match constantly, followed by things of type B, the match lighting. Time after time.
The billiard balls. Cue ball hits eight ball moves. Again, constant conjunction.
Right. But here's the philosophical kicker, the skeptical move. The events are conjoined, but Hume insists they are never connected.
What's the difference there? Seems subtle.
It's crucial. Conjoined just means they happen together in space and time. Connected implies some underlying force or necessity linking them. Hume says we only ever see the conjunction. The events themselves are totally separate, loose items.
So the impact of the first ball happens at, say, time 1. The movement of the second ball happens at time 2. Two different moments, two separate events.
And rationally, purely based on observation, the link between them is arbitrary. If the second ball suddenly flew straight up or vanished, well, we'd be surprised. Massively surprised.
Yeah, I'd think I was dreaming.
But Hume would say you couldn't prove it was logically impossible. It wouldn't be a contradiction in the way a round square is. You just haven't seen it happen before.
Okay, I think I get it. We only expect the usual outcome because we've seen it constantly conjoined in the past.
Precisely. And that repeated observation creates something in us, the observer, a feeling of custom or habit.
So the necessity isn't in the balls colliding. It's a feeling in me.
It's a subjective feeling. My mind, through habit, develops an expectation, an anticipation. When I see the first ball moving, my imagination jumps ahead to the second ball moving. That feeling of expectation is the origin of the idea of necessary connection.
And then we mistakenly think that feeling corresponds to something real out there between the objects. We project it onto the world.
That's Hume's diagnosis.
Yeah.
It leads him to define cause purely descriptively, based only on what we see. A cause is, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, an object that comes before and is next to another object, and where all objects similar to the first one are followed by objects similar to the second one.
It's all about the observable pattern, what we see when we see it, and the repetition. Nothing about underlying power or force.
Exactly. No metaphysics. Just description of regularities. And notice, this implies a time gap, right? The cause happens, then the effect. They're separate moments. The imagination bridges that gap because of habit.
And if that's the foundation for all our knowledge of the world, yeah, you can see why Kant felt he had to respond. Science looks like it's built on psychological quicksand.
It really does. It makes scientific laws seem like just summaries of past coincidences, not necessary truths about reality.
Okay, so Hume drops this philosophical bomb. And Kant, who deeply respected Newtonian physics and its claims to universal necessary laws, he can't accept this, right?
Absolutely not. For Kant, Hume's conclusion that causality is just subjective habit was, well, a scandal for philosophy. It seemed to make objective science impossible. If Hume's right, Newton's laws are just well-established habits of our thinking, not truths about the cosmos.
So Kant needs to find necessity and universality again. But he can't just ignore Hume's point that we don't see the necessary connection out there in the objects.
Right. He can't go back to the old rationalist idea that necessity is just in the things themselves. Hume blew that up. So Kant makes his famous Copernican revolution in philosophy.
He shifts the focus from the object to the subject, the observer.
Exactly. If the necessity isn't found in the experience of objects, maybe it's a necessary condition for having experience in the first place. Maybe it's part of the structure of the mind itself.
So causality, Ursache und Wirkung in German, isn't something we learn from the world. It's a tool we bring to the world to make sense of it.
Precisely. Causality becomes one of Kant's 12 categories. Think of them as the fundamental concepts of the understanding, the basic software the mind uses to process the raw data of sensation.
Like built-in organizing principles.
Yes, and they are a priori. They come before experience, logically speaking, and they structure experience. They don't provide the content, the specific sights and sounds, but they provide the form, the way that content must be organized for us to understand it as an objective world.
So the mind isn't just a blank slate passively receiving impressions like Hume thought. It's actively structuring them.
It's an active organizer.
Yeah.
But you raise a good point. How does something purely conceptual, like the category of causality, actually connect with messy sensory data? How does the abstract rule apply to the concrete perception?
Yeah, how does that work?
This is where Kant introduces a crucial, if notoriously difficult idea. The schematism, the pure concepts of the understanding.
Schematism, okay.
Think of it as the intermediary step. Our senses give us information ordered in time, inner sense, and space, outer sense. The schematism connects the pure abstract categories to the form of time. It translates the logical category into a rule about time.
So it makes the abstract category usable on the sensory data we actually receive.
Essentially, yes. The schema for causality isn't the abstract concept itself, but is the rule of necessary succession in time. It's the idea that for any change, in effect, there must be something preceding it, the cause upon which it follows according to a rule.
Ah, okay, so it's about making the time sequence objective.
Exactly. And that takes us right into the heart of Kant's direct response to Hume, the second analogy of experience in the critique of pure reason.
Right, this is where he tackles that problem of subjective versus objective time.
Yes. Let's use Kant's famous examples. Imagine looking at a house. Your eyes might scan from the roof down to the basement or from the basement up to the roof. The order you perceive the parts in is up to you. It's reversible.
Because the parts of the house, roof, walls, basement, exist all at the same time. They coexist. My looking is sequential, but the reality is simultaneous.
Correct. That's a subjective sequence of perception. Now contrast that with seeing a ship sailing downstream. You see it upstream, position A, then midstream, position B, then downstream, position C.
Okay, and I can't perceive C before A. That sequence is fixed, irreversible.
That's an objective sequence. Kant's genius insight is that the only way our minds can distinguish between the subjective sequence, scanning the house, and the objective sequence, watching the ship, is by applying the a priori rule of causality.
How so?
The principle of causality tells the understanding. If you perceive an irreversible sequence, A, then B, then C, then that sequence represents an objective change where C is determined by B and B by A according to a rule. It provides the necessary structure to interpret the flow of perceptions as representing a real change in the world, rather than just the random flickering of our own attention.
So, without the category of causality already structuring my perception, my experience would just be a jumble, like constantly scanning the house with no fixed order to events.
Kant called it a rhapsody of perceptions. Just one thing after another, with no objective connection, no way to distinguish simultaneity from succession. Causality is the rule that binds perceptions together into a unified, objective experience of time.
Wow. So for Kant, causality isn't derived from observing objective sequences. It's the precondition for being able to perceive objective sequences in the first place.
Exactly. It secures objectivity.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental requirement for having a coherent world experience linked to the single, I think what Kant calls transcendental apperception.
Okay, that's a powerful reversal of Hume. But does Kant agree with Hume that the cause must come before the effect in time?
Here, Kant refines things a bit. Unlike Hume, who generally implies a temporal gap, Kant emphasizes the continuity of time. This means a cause and effect it can be simultaneous, or at least immediately contiguous.
How can they be simultaneous?
Think of a lead ball resting on a cushion. The ball's weight, cause, and the dent in the cushion effect exist at the same time, but the dent is still determined by the weight according to a rule. The crucial thing for Kant isn't necessarily temporal priority, but determination according to a rule within the time sequence.
Okay, that makes sense. But this leads to a big debate, doesn't it? The looseness of fit issue. What exactly does this category of causality guarantee?
Right. Does it just give us the very general abstract principle, every event must have some cause or other? That's a foundational transcendental rule.
Or does it somehow give us the specific laws of nature, like water must boil at 100 degrees Celsius? That's what scientists actually use.
The standard interpretation, the weak reading, is that the second analogy only provides the general framework, the necessity of some rule for objective time. Finding the specific rules, like the boiling point of water or the law of gravity, still requires empirical investigation, observation, experimentation.
So the category ensures that there are laws, but not what those laws are.
Pretty much. The specific laws have to be discovered a posteriori. This interpretation helps defend Kant against the charge that he makes a logical leap, the so-called non sequitur argument.
Which is?
The criticism was that Kant argues, we perceive events as irreversible, therefore there must be an a priori law of causality, which looks like arguing from effect back to cause.
Yeah, that sounds dodgy.
But the defense is, that's not Kant's argument. He's not concluding the law from the perception. He's saying the a priori law is the condition that makes the perception of objective irreversibility possible in the first place. It's a necessary presupposition for objective experience, not an inference from it.
Okay, got it. The law enables the experience. It's not derived from it.
Right. And to help clarify this whole shift from subjective observation to objective knowledge, Kant uses another helpful distinction, especially in his later work, the Prolegomena. He talks about perception judgments versus experience judgments.
Wahrnehmungsurteil and Erfahrungsurteil. Okay, how does this help?
A perception judgment is purely subjective. It's just about my current state. The room feels warm to me. Or, when I let go of the stone, I perceived it falling. It only claims validity for me right now.
It's like Hume's raw observations.
Exactly. An experience judgment, however, claims objective validity. It achieves necessity and universality because the perceptions have been connected, synthesized, under the categories, especially causality.
So instead of the stone felt heavy to me, it becomes
something like the stone possesses mass, which interacts with the Earth's gravitational field according to the law F ma. That judgment isn't just about my feeling. It's a claim about the objective world, universally valid for all observers, because it's structured by the necessary a priori concepts like substance, causality, and community interaction.
So the experience judgment takes the subjective input and transforms it via the categories into objective scientific knowledge.
That's the core of Kant's project, in the critique of pure reason. He shows how the mind's own necessary structures take Hume's fleeting, subjective regularities and elevate them into the objective, necessary, and universal laws that science requires.
Okay, so Kant, in the critique of pure reason, KRV, has established this framework. Causality, as an a priori category, makes objective time sequences possible. But science isn't just about time, is it? It's about physical objects, matter, forces, interaction in space. How does he bridge that gap?
That's precisely the task of his next major work relevant here, The Metaphysical Foundations of Natural Science, or MAN. Here, he takes the general categories from the KRV and applies them specifically to the empirical concept of matter moving in space.
So moving from the general operating system to a specific application, like physics.
You can put it that way. The key shift is that while the KRV's second analogy just required a cause for any change, temporal determination, the MAN focuses on external causality for changes in matter.
Why external?
Because of how Kant defines matter. Matter, fundamentally, is that which fills space and is movable. Crucially, it's conceived as inert. It doesn't have its own internal principle of change or, desires or goals like a living thing might.
So if it changes, if it starts moving, stops moving, changes direction, something else must have acted on it from the outside.
Exactly. The second law of mechanics in the MAN states essentially that all change in matter has an external cause. This isn't just an empirical observation for Kant, it's an a priori principle derived from the concept of matter itself as structured by our understanding.
This already sounds very different from Hume's picture. Hume just saw sequences. Kant is talking about determination by external causes.
And this brings in something Hume explicitly rejected. Force. Craft. Kant's theory of causality, especially in the MAN, is absolutely not a Humean regularity theory.
Because Hume said we never see the force, only the sequence.
Right. For Kant, the cause produces its effect through a force. That force is the connecting link, the determining power that Hume couldn't find in mere observation.
So Kant brings force back in, but not as something we see, but as something we must think.
As a necessary concept to make sense of physical interaction. In fact, Kant argues that the very possibility of matter filling space depends a priori on two fundamental opposing forces. Repulsion, elasticity, the force by which matter resists intrusion and fills space, and attraction, like gravitation, the force by which matter acts on other matter, even at a distance.
So these forces aren't just things we discover empirically. They are necessary conditions for even conceiving of matter interacting in a physical world according to laws.
That's Kant's argument. He's trying to give a philosophical a priori grounding to Newtonian physics, which Hume seemed to reduce to mere observed habits. Newton described how gravity worked mathematically, but Kant wants to show why forces like attraction and repulsion are necessary concepts for objective science.
Let's go back to the billiard balls one last time. Hume says, ball one hits ball two moves. I see the sequence, not the force.
Kant, drawing on the MAN, would say, to understand this event objectively, we must conceive of ball one exerting an external repulsive force on ball two upon impact. Furthermore, both balls persist as matter occupying space due to the interplay of fundamental attractive and repulsive forces. These forces are necessary concepts for understanding the interaction as a lawful physical event, not just a sequence.
So the concept of force is indispensable for a scientific objective account, even if the force itself isn't a direct sensory impression like color or shape.
Precisely. Kant's willingness to accept even something as non-intuitive as Newton's action at a distance, gravity, shows his commitment. The concept of force is necessary for the objective validity of mechanics, regardless of its observability in Hume's strict sense. The MAN really grounds causality, the dynamics of physical interaction in space.
Okay, this is starting to form a complete picture. We have the KRV giving the universal rules for any possible experience in time, like causality. Then the MAN applies these to matter and space, grounding mechanics, and force. It seems like Kant has saved objective science from Humean skepticism.
He's certainly secured the foundations for necessary laws. But Kant realized there was still a huge problem left over. Think about the sheer, overwhelming variety of specific empirical laws in nature.
You mean not just every event has a cause, but why this specific chemical reaction happens, or why this particular plant grows this way, or the exact laws of electromagnetism.
Exactly. There are countless specific causal laws. And from the perspective of the general categories in the KRV, they look, well, contingent, accidental. There's no logical reason why water should boil at 100 degrees C and not 101 degrees C, derivable from the pure category of causality itself.
So science could still just be this massive, potentially infinite list of disconnected facts. How do we get the sense of system, the unity we strive for in science, like searching for a theory that unifies gravity and quantum mechanics?
Where does that drive for unity come from? That's the central question of Kant's third great critique, the critique of judgment, KDU. Since these specific laws aren't logically necessary from the viewpoint of our understanding, the KRV's categories, we need a different principle to guide our investigation of them.
And this involves a different kind of judgment.
Yes. He distinguishes between determining judgment and reflecting judgment.
Okay, break that down for us. Determining judgment is...
Determining judgment is what we mostly used in the KRV. You have a universal rule, like the category of causality, given by the understanding, and you have a particular perception, like seeing the ship move, and you just apply the rule to the particular. Rule particular.
Subsuming the specific case under the general law. Got it.
Reflecting judgment, however, works the other way around. You are given a particular observation, maybe a strange new biological phenomenon or an odd experimental result, and your task is to find the universal rule or principle that explains it and connects it systematically with other known laws. Particular rule.
So it's about the search, the discovery process.
It's about the search for systematic unity among the seemingly contingent laws of nature. And the guiding principle for this search, Kant argues, is a feeling or assumption of purposiveness, Zweckmäßigkeit, in nature.
Purposiveness. Does that mean nature actually has purposes, like designed by someone?
Ah, that's the crucial Kantian distinction. It's an as-if principle. Reflecting judgment must proceed as if nature were designed by an intelligence, as if its specific laws were arranged deliberately so that we can discover them and fit them into a coherent system.
So we don't know its design, but we have to act and think as if it were in order to do science effectively.
Exactly. It's a regulative principle, not a constitutive one. It doesn't tell us how nature is constitutive, but it tells us how we must investigate nature, regulative, if we hope to make systematic sense of it. It guides our research, pushing us to look for broader patterns, unifying theories, connections between different domains.
Like assuming there's a rational order to be found, even if we haven't found it yet.
Precisely. We assume nature is cooperative, in a sense, amenable to our understanding, finding a system within it. Think about the drive for elegance, simplicity, economy, and scientific theories. Kant would say these are expressions of this regulative principle of purposiveness.
And when a scientist does find a unifying law, connecting previously disparate facts,
Kant says this success brings a particular kind of pleasure. It's the feeling of harmony between nature and our cognitive faculties. It feels good because it confirms our underlying regulative assumption that nature is systematic, rewarding the search and encouraging further investigation.
Okay, that makes sense as a guide for general scientific inquiry. But Kant applies this idea of purposiveness particularly strongly to certain things, right?
Yes, most famously to living organisms. He calls them natural purposes.
Smack.
Why are they special?
Because in an organism, the parts seem to exist for the sake of the whole, and the whole exists through the coordination of the parts. Think of a heart. It exists to pump blood for the whole body. But the body also sustains the heart. Each part is both cause and effect of the overall form and function.
It's a self-organizing, self-maintaining system.
Exactly. And Kant argues that this kind of internal organization is very difficult, maybe impossible, for us to fully grasp using only the kind of mechanical, backward-looking causality we discussed from the...
Mechanical causality explains the hand by the chain of physical causes that built its cell division, evolutionary history, etc.
Right. But that doesn't seem to capture the intuition that the hand is for grasping, that its structure is organized around its purpose or function.
So we need a different kind of causality here.
We need to supplement mechanical explanation with teleological causality explanation in terms of ends or purposes. Here, the idea or representation of the effect, the purpose, like grasping, acts as a cause guiding the formation of the object, the hand. It's thinking forward, from the goal to the parts, rather than just backward, from the parts to the result.
But isn't this bringing back purpose into nature? Isn't that unscientific?
Kant is very careful here. He introduces the dialectic of teleological judgment. He insists that for scientific explanation, we must always seek mechanical causes as far as possible. That's non-negotiable.
Okay, so mechanism remains primary for science.
Yes. But, he says, for certain things, especially organisms, our understanding finds mechanical explanation alone insufficient to grasp their organized unity. We find it necessary, as a regulative principle for our judgment, to also think of them as if they were designed for a purpose.
So both perspectives are needed for us to make sense of it, even if only the mechanical one counts as full scientific explanation.
Exactly. They seem contradictory, but Kant says they must coexist for our finite discursive minds.
Yeah.
We can only resolve the tension by positing a deeper, supersensible ground of nature, where mechanism and teleology might be unified, but that ground is unknowable to us.
How does this relate back to Hume's critique of the design argument for God? Hume basically said you can't argue from the world to a designer because the world is unique, unlike watches where we've seen many watches and know they have makers.
Right, Hume attacked the analogy. Kant's response, via teleology, is different. He doesn't try to prove a designer from nature. Instead, he argues that the internal organization of a single organism, its intrinsic purposiveness, forces our reflective judgment to think of it as if it were the product of an intelligent cause.
It's not an argument about probability based on analogy, but about a necessary way our minds must think when confronted with that specific kind of organized complexity.
Precisely. We are compelled to use the concept of purpose as a guide to understand it. This leads Kant to posit the regulative idea of an intuitive understanding, a hypothetical mind that wouldn't need our step-by-step mechanical or teleological thinking, but could grasp the unity of nature directly. We can't be that mind, but the idea guides our own scientific striving towards greater systematicity.
So Kant sort of sidesteps Hume's critique by focusing not on proving God, but on the necessary subjective conditions for us understanding organized nature, which involves thinking as if it were designed.
Yes, it's a brilliant way to acknowledge the limits Hume pointed out, while still justifying our scientific practice of seeking order and purpose in the natural world.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together. It's been quite a journey from Hume's skepticism to Kant's complex system.
It really has. We started with Hume basically saying, look, all we observe are events happening one after another. That feeling of necessary connection. It's just a habit in our minds, born from seeing things constantly conjoined.
He leaves us with disconnected facts and science built on shaky psychological ground.
Then Kant comes along, profoundly disturbed by this, and performs his revolution. He says, no, necessity isn't in the objects, nor is it just a subjective feeling. It's in the a priori structure of the mind itself.
The categories, like causality, are the necessary preconditions for having any objective experience at all, especially regarding time sequences, KRV, and physical interactions in space, MANN. That saves the necessity needed for physics.
Right. But then Kant realizes that doesn't explain the overwhelming variety and apparent contingency of specific natural laws.
Which brings us to the critique of judgment, KDU, and the reflecting judgment. We need to seek unity, guided by a regulative principle assuming nature is purposeful, as if designed for our understanding.
So you see the difference in approach. Hume starts with the multiplicity of impressions and struggles to build objective unity, only reaching subjective habit. Kant starts with the necessary unity of the thinking subject, the I think, and shows how this unity imposes necessary structures, categories, on experience, and provides a necessary guiding principle, purposiveness, for organizing the contingent details.
That's a really clear way to put it. And for you listening, trying to make sense of complex systems or scientific discoveries, Kant's view offers a kind of philosophical backing.
Yeah, it suggests that the scientific drive to find unifying laws, to make systematic sense of the world, isn't just a historical accident or a lucky guess. It's rooted in the very structure of reason itself, guided by this necessary assumption that nature is a system we can understand. Even if specific laws turn out wrong, the quest for systematic knowledge is justified.
The individual laws might be contingent, discovered empirically, but the framework demanding they fit into a system is necessary a priori.
Which leads us to a final thought to leave you with, something that brings all three critiques together.
Yeah.
If our belief in the ultimate unity of science, our search for a theory of everything, relies not just on empirical evidence, but fundamentally on this regulative assumption that nature is systematic and purposeful.
This as-if principle.
Does that mean the very pursuit of scientific unification at its deepest level involves an element of, well, philosophical faith, a commitment to the idea that the universe is ultimately intelligible to us?
A fascinating question that really highlights how intertwined science and philosophy remain. Thanks for joining us for this deep